In the small town of Birch Hollow, where everyone knew each other's business, lived an old woman named Mrs. Ethel Crenshaw. She had lived in the town for as long as anyone could remember, always with a kind smile, always with a basket of fresh-baked cookies or a handmade gift for anyone who crossed her path. But it was her latest creation, her miraculous homemade shampoo, that everyone in town was raving about. "It makes your hair feel so soft," they said. "Like silk, almost like it's alive." People were obsessed. Ethel's little jars of shampoo, tied with delicate bows, were gifted to everyone for birthdays, holidays, or just because. She claimed it was made from a secret family recipe, an all-natural blend of herbs and oils. Women who used it swore their hair never felt so healthy, and men said it made them feel years younger. It didn't take long before almost everyone in Birch Hollow was using Mrs. Crenshaw's concoction. But something was wrong. It started with the cemetery. Old Gravesend Cemetery sat on the outskirts of Birch Hollow, a forgotten relic of the past where generations of townsfolk had been laid to rest. Over the past few months, rumors began swirling that something strange was happening there. Groundskeeper Carl Miller, a grizzled man who had tended the cemetery for years, noticed that graves seemed disturbed. At first, it was just the older graves, ones from over a century ago. But then newer graves began to show signs of tampering. Fresh dirt moved aside, faint impressions left in the earth as if something heavy had been dragged. One rainy night, Carl stayed late to investigate. Armed with a lantern and his shovel, he prowled through the cemetery, determined to catch whoever was responsible for the desecration of these graves. The wind howled through the trees, and the rain pounded down. But Carl pressed on. It was then, near the oldest part of the cemetery, that he heard the scraping sound. Peering through the sheets of rain, Carl saw a hunched figure moving slowly between the tombstones, a large sack slung over its shoulder. He crept closer, his breath catching in his throat when the figure stepped into the light of his lantern. It was Mrs. Crenshaw. Her face was twisted with unnatural concentration, her wild eyes reflecting the dim light as she dragged the sack toward a fresh grave. Carl watched in horror as she lowered it into an open pit, not with the reverence of a burial, but with the hurried, frantic movements of someone hiding evidence. Before he could move, she spotted him. Her smile, the one she always wore in town, spread across her face. But now, under the shadows of the twisted trees, it seemed grotesque, unnatural. "Why, Carl?" she called sweetly. "What are you doing out here in this awful weather?" Carl froze, his heart thudding painfully in his chest. "What are you doing, Mrs. Crenshaw?" he managed to stammer. She chuckled, a sound like gravel grinding underfoot. "Oh, just tending to the dead, dear. You know, they don't rest as easily as people think." She took a step toward him, and in the faint light, Carl saw what he hadn't noticed before. Her hands, those same hands that baked cookies and knit scarves, were covered in dirt. But worse than the dirt was the pale, fleshy substance clinging to her fingernails. His stomach lurched as he realized it was decaying skin. The old woman took another step, her voice low and soothing. "You wouldn't believe the secrets these poor souls hold, Carl. So many people just let them rot. But me, I know how to make them useful again." Carl stumbled back, horrified, the pieces slowly falling into place. The shampoo. Her miraculous shampoo that everyone in town adored. It wasn't just herbs and oils. Mrs. Crenshaw's eyes gleamed as she saw the realization dawning on him. "Oh, yes," she whispered. "It's the bodies, their essence. Hair and skin hold so much power after death. I mix it with my special formula and, well, you've seen the results. Haven't you, Carl? Doesn't everyone in town love my gift?" Carl's blood ran cold. Everyone in Birch Hollow was washing their hair with the dead. He turned to run, but the rain-soaked ground betrayed him. He slipped, crashing to the mud as Mrs. Crenshaw's soft humming filled the night air. He scrambled to his feet, But she was already there, standing over him, her grin wider now, her eyes glittering with madness. "Don't be afraid, Carl," she cooed. "I'm doing them a favor. They wanted to be useful again. And you, my dear, you'll be next. Just think of all the good you'll do for the town." Carl screamed, but it was swallowed by the storm as Mrs. Crenshaw's hands clamped down on his throat. The next morning, Birch Hollow was buzzing with excitement. Mrs. Crenshaw had delivered a fresh batch of her shampoo, this time with a note. "Special edition," it read, "now with even more vitality." And as the townsfolk washed their hair with the strange, silky liquid, they couldn't help but notice how soft and healthy it made them feel, like they were alive in a way they hadn't been before. But if you stood very still in the quiet of the night, you could almost hear the faintest of whispers as the wind swept through the trees, voices that hadn't spoken in years, now trapped in every bottle that Mrs. Crenshaw gifted with her loving, twisted smile.